Hello everyone, welcome to the news desk. Rich Hagan sitting alongside Ian Duke from Inside R&D. Ian, welcome along.
It's great to be here.
Lovely to have you. So we are going to talk about part 2 of the Magic Online draft archetypes, what people have been drafting online, and also really this new draft format. So yesterday, Marshall came in, talked to us about the 5 enemy color pairs. So you're drafting your black-white warriors. That's the standout of those 5, I guess. Very, very powerful archetype. Well, fundamentally, we're in a world of clans, and that means 3 colors. So we're going to explore those together for you now.
Yep.
So why don't we kick us off with what is one of the staple modern archetypes, black, green, and white. Let's take a look at the Abzan.
Yeah, so Abzan picks up the new bolster mechanic, which works really well with Outlast. Of course, we've seen many of the Outlast creatures key off of +1/+1 counters, granting keywords to your other creatures, and bolster is another way to get +1/+1 counters onto your creatures.
So why don't we take a look at the top 5 commons that are being picked in Fate Reforged drafts. These are amongst draft winners. Now we choose 1st to 5th pick because obviously you're going to choose fantastic rares or mythics potentially if they're going to fit in your deck. But the meat and potatoes of every draft format is the commons and the uncommons. So this is 1st through 5 among your draft winners on Magic Online. What stands out for you there, Ian?
Yeah, so Sandstep Outcast, this is definitely noted as one of the top white commons here. Often you'll play it just to get 2 bodies for 1 card, including a 1/1 Flying Spirit token. However, you can also have this creature enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, which works really well with all your Outlast synergies from Khans of Tarkir.
So then you've got Harsh Sustenance, Reach of Shadows, removal, Sandblast removal, and then you've got the green card, Whisperer of the Wilds, which is super popular.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about how important 2-drops are in this format. They're relatively scarce, and it's a format dominated by morphs, which come down on turn 3. So anytime you can pick up a quality 2-drop for your deck, you're really, really happy about it. Whisperer of the Wilds, not only does it come down on turn 2, but it also accelerates you into your more powerful plays. Abzan decks tend to have a lot of powerful high end, and just getting to that a little bit faster is really, really helpful.
All right, let's move on to the top 5 uncommons in Fate Reforged. There we go.
Yeah, so at Uncommon, we have Elite Scaleguard, one of the premier uncommons in Fate Reforged, regarded by many players as the top uncommon. Just, again, works really, really well with your +1/+1 counter synergies, works well in both an aggressive or a defensive deck, just absolutely a premium.
All right, and then, it's a 2-set draft format, which means that Khans of Tarkir is involved. Let's look at the commons and uncommons from Khans of Tarkir, most popularly drafted for the Abzan.
Yeah, we have some mainstays here like Abzan Guide and Armament Core, heavy hitters that come down later in the game, really, really powerful. Abzan Guide gaining you life, which is really what an Abzan mid-range deck wants to do.
So that's the Abzan for you. So we move on now to the red, white, and blue, and that means it's time for the Jeskai. Let's take a look. So what are we trying to do here?
Yeah, so Jeskai decks, the prowess mechanic is the core to these decks here. You really want to mix creatures and spells together in the right ratios here, and Fate Reforged really helps you do that by adding spells that manifest. So they function as creatures, but they also trigger your prowess.
Yeah, there's no doubt that when I played with Manifest at the pre-release, it felt so smooth when I was playing Jeskai.
Yeah, it feels good, doesn't it?
Oh, hey, look, it's a spell that's a creature.
Yep.
Genius, so good. Let's take a look at the top 5 commons then in Fate Reforged.
Yeah, so Sandstep Outcast, again, we talked about Aven Surveyor is a card I want to just mention here. One of the top blue commons for sure. It's really a tempo card at heart, which is what Jeskai wants to be able to do. A lot of the creatures in this format are relatively expensive in terms of mana. Morph creatures cost a lot to play and then turn face up. Bouncing one back to the hand gives you a huge tempo swing.
Let me ask you about Aven Surveyor from an inside R&D perspective.
Yeah.
The ability of bouncing an opposing creature or returning a creature to hand is something that's been around in Magic since the beginning. We think classically of Mana War, which is 3 mana, and we think of Mistraven at 4 mana, and now here we are, Aven Surveyor at 5 mana. Obviously, when you pay more for the same thing, in a sense, we feel, oh, that's worse. But explain to us why, within its own time, each of those turns out to be terrific.
Yeah, so throughout Magic's history, creatures have become more and more important over time. R&D is really focused in on one of the most fun parts about Magic is attacking and blocking with creatures and how to plan out your combat. And so we've shifted the focus and the power a little bit more toward creatures. As we've done that, these unsummoned type effects have become more powerful than they once were in Magic's history.
All right, so let's go on to the top 5 uncommons in Fate Reforged for the Jeskai.
Yeah, so Wild Slash, just a great removal spell, importantly can take out morph creatures for just 1 mana. Valorous Stance, we saw this in Eric Froehlich's drafts earlier. Just another premium removal spell, very flexible, can do multiple things. And then running down the line here, Mistfire Adept, just one of the best blue uncommons here. Prowess, gives your creatures flying. Elite Scaleguard we mentioned, Pyrotechnics, another premium removal spell.
Let's take a look at Khans of Tarkir then for the Jeskai. What do we have here?
Again, some classics like Jeskai Charm, Jeskai Wind Scout, one of the best prowess creatures with flying there. Mystic of the Hidden Way, a tempo card can help you get through with unblockability, and just rounding out with some solid creatures, Seeker of the Way, Highspire Mantis, a couple more removal spells.
All right, so that's Abzan and Jeskai. Our third clan, we're going to delve deep into Sultai.
Yeah, so Sultai is all about using the graveyard, and this is another deck where you really want to balance out some ways to get cards into your graveyard with some ways to be rewarded for that, particular delve cards.
So why don't we take a look at the top 5 commons that are being drafted right now on Magic Online.
Yep, so we talked a lot about Aven Surveyor, also really good in this deck. Some great removal spells, Reach of Shadows, one of the best commons in Fate Reforged. Whisper of the Wilds, great 2-drop, accelerates you. And Ethereal Ambush, the blue-green enemy-colored common, just a solid way to get a couple of creatures into play at instant speed.
How aware is R&D for cards like Ethereal Ambush, where basically I'm sitting there, I've got 4 cards in hand, I've got 5 mana up, I pass the turn. There's an awful lot of things that can go wrong for the other side of the table. And how much effort do you go into making sure that there are choices for the opponent to make when their opponent has passed the turn? Because sometimes you sit there and you go, yeah, you've either got Ethereal Ambush or you haven't. Those are the only 2 possible outcomes here. I don't really know what to do. Am I meant to not attack? Right?
So hidden information is a really important part to the fun of Magic, and we try to, especially for example, blue decks that might be playing counterspells, give you a variety of things so you can hold up your mana and your opponent doesn't know exactly what you have. However, we also try to make sure those cards aren't frustrating to play into, so you don't get punished if you try to cast a spell and your opponent counterspells it. They're just trading 1 for 1 with you. And similarly, Ethereal Ambush, they're only 2/2 creatures. Often, they're not going to trade that well with yours, so it's not that devastating if you attack into it sometimes.
Yeah, and if you have a big guy, then basically it's still a 1 for 1 because often they're having to put both 2/2s in the way.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's move on then from the top 5 commons to the top 5 uncommons.
Yeah, Tibur Sabertooth, one of my personal favorite cards, a top green uncommon for sure. Noxious Dragon, just a great heavy hitter creature, probably the best of the dragon cycle in Fate Reforged, arguably. Abzan Beastmaster, just a great way to draw cards. Notably, you can even draw a card the turn you play it if you're on the play sometimes. And a couple other solid cards in Meringue River Prowler and Mistfire Adept.
Those dragons, if they were at 5, I think a lot of people would play multiples. Have you put it at 6 in part because you want those dragons to kind of go more round the table and actually end up 1 6-drop in a bunch of different decks?
Yeah, absolutely. We try to be not too prescriptive as far as your first picks for the draft. Sometimes you'll open a great rare, of course, but having these dragons be more aggressively costed at uncommon probably isn't that fun because you're just going to first pick them too often and run into them too often. We like them to float around a little bit, so anyone who wants a dragon, has a chance to see one at the table. Yeah,
and we certainly saw that in the draft this morning. We saw the white dragon going around a couple of times past people who were like, no, I don't need to take that now on pick 2 because, I can let someone have it in the middle of the pack, or it might even come back to me.
Right, and as cool as dragons are in Fate Reforged, well, we've got one more set coming up in the block. So
what's the name of that?
I believe it's called Dragons of Tarkir.
Okay, lovely. Good to know. So let's move on then and see what Khans of Tarkir brings to the Sultai mix.
Yep, classics again, Abomination of Gadul, a great 3-color creature there. Sultai Charm, always a welcome addition. A lot of removal spells on this list. You see the Sultai decks tend to be more controlling, so you really want to have answers to your opponent's creatures.
Morph was incredibly popular in Khans of Tarkir, as it was first time around, indeed, way back in the early 2000s. How nervous was R&D about pairing Morph with Manifest?
We talked a lot about board complexity. Morph by itself is a pretty complex mechanic. It has the potential to be frustrating to new players if you're not familiar with all the cards in the format and you don't know what morphs to play around. That's part of why we have this 5 mana rule we call with morphs, where you play a morph, I play a morph, I attack into yours. You know you can safely block until the turn where I have 5 mana. That's where morphs can start beating each other in combat.
All right, so on we go then. Let's see what's coming up next. I think it's time to get very aggressive with the Mardu.
Yeah, Mardu, the speediest of the clans for sure. It gets even faster in Fate Reforged with the new dash mechanic. Dash, one of my personal favorite new mechanics, just has a lot of cool things going on with it. And these are really where the aggressive decks live.
Okay, so let's take a look at the top 5 commons as drafted by you, the viewers, on Magic Online.
Yeah, many of these we talked about, so I'll kind of breeze through them. Bathe in Dragonfire, one of the top red commons here. Premium removal spell. Goblin Heel Cutter, one of my favorite cards in the set. Really showcases the dash mechanic, a lot of interesting things to do here, get past your opponent's blockers.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting card, the Heel Cutter, because the others are relatively easy to see what you're getting and why they're good.
Yep.
You know, it's very easy to pass. 3 mana, 4 damage, your big thing's dead. That's easy, we understand that. And oh look, not only do I get this, I get a free flyer as well in the package. But the Goblin Heel Cutter, if I say to you, would you like a 3/2 for 4? Your first point is, not really.
What else does it do, Rich?
Right. So I think those sort of cards are very interesting to see how people start working out that they're good, rather than just, hooray, there's my removal spell and there's my value two guys in one
Also,
card.
just a lot of options from the dash mechanic in general.
Right. Okay, so let's take a look now at the top Fate Reforged uncommons.
Yeah, Battle Brawler, this is a card a lot of players have talked about. It's great because it's a premium 2-drop, talked a lot about that before, and it beats morphs in combat once you enable the first strike with a red or a white permanent. Yeah, Wild Slash, Pyrotechnics, great removal spells, Elite Scale Guard we talked about, and Orc Sure Shot. This is a really cool card that works well with Dash. It's whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, so with Dash creatures you can do that over and over again.
You often talk in R&D about the knobs you have on a card that you can turn. Looking at Battle Brawler, is that the kind of card that begins life as a warrior, and you are knowing that therefore when it goes in a black-white warrior deck it's potentially going to be fantastic? Or is it a card that starts off essentially with a blank creature type line, and at some point during development someone says, do you know what would actually tweak this into something we really want to do at Uncommon? Let's make it a warrior as well as an orc.
Yeah, absolutely the latter there. In general, the creative team decides what creature types most of the creatures are. However, development has some say in that when we want to enable tribal strategies in limited or even constructed tribal decks. And so I believe in this case, development specifically flagged this card to be a warrior to work with all the Warrior Matters cards.
Nice. All right, let's go to Khans of Tarkir then for the Mardu. What are you picking once you've got your Fate Reforged? Here we are.
Yeah, so some powerful 3-color cards here for sure, although I do want to mention these aggressive Mardu decks really should have a basis in 2 colors, with the third one being a splash to ensure you can play your early drops on curve. That said, I love a Ponyback Brigade, especially in combination with Trumpet Blasts and Rush of Battle. Mardu Skull Hunter, another great 2-drop. Chief of the Edge, one of those Warrior Matters cards we talked about, a great addition.
Okay, let's get to our final clan. Last but not least, it's Temur, and they are ferocious.
Yeah, Temur's all about big, beefy creatures with high power. You want as many 4+ power creatures in your deck as possible to enable ferocious. Hopefully you have some mana acceleration in the form of Whisper of the Wilds, for example, to get you up to those large creatures.
All right, let's take a look at the commons that are being most regularly picked.
Yeah, and to no surprise, Whisper of the Wilds #1 on there. Bathe in Dragonfire, Aven Surveyor, cards we talked about before. Goblin Heel Cutter, also solid in Temur because the Temur decks tend to be aggressive. Not speedy in the same way as the Mardu decks, but they do want to be attacking with those high power creatures.
And then you've got your Lotus Path Djinn, your 2/3 flyer.
Yep.
That's kind of a bit better than a 2/3 flyer.
Yeah, solid addition to any deck. Not particularly at its best in Temur, but you know, a happy addition to any deck.
Let's go to the commons then. What are we going to look for in there? Yeah, the uncommons rather.
Yep, a bunch of cards we talked about before. Removal spells, Pyrotechnics, Wild Slash. Temur Sabertooth at its best in Temur. Ensures that you're always going to have a 4-power creature on the battlefield. Very difficult to remove. Can rebuy things like Bear's Companion, which is really cool. Mistfire Adept, another great addition, and Shockmaw Dragon, a 4-power flyer. Teamer decks, often it's hard to come by flyers, so this is a welcome addition.
All right, and we look at Khans of Tarkir. Where are we going with those?
Yeah, Snowhorn Rider, Bear's Companion, just great 3-color cards to top out your curve. Savage Punch, just absolutely one of the best cards you can have in Teamer decks, especially base blue-green, where it's hard to come by removal. You can just deal massive damage by removing your opponent's blocker and attacking for 2 extra that turn. Yeah, and Ice Feather Aven, another favorite card of mine.
All right, so there you are. Right here, we've taught you how to know your clans.